Hello everybody, I'm Cameron and welcome back to another Python lesson. Today we are going to be talking about the other type of loop. This is a for loop. So last time we talked about while loops, I decided to do that video first because we had just done if statements and it was very similar to the type of stuff in if statements. Now a for loop is more of a set thing. So rather than it'll keep continuing as long as a condition is true, you kind of predetermine how many times you're going to go through a loop. And we could do that in a couple different ways. So we could actually go through a list of numbers. So let's say I want to print every number 1 to 10. So I could do for, and we start out with the keyword for. Now this is where it might get a little bit tricky for you guys. You could actually name your variable right here. So this is, you're creating like a temporary variable that exists within the for loop here. It's not going to exist in a scope outside of the for loop. I'm going to call it num. I usually call it num, or if we're using it as an index, which we'll get to in a second, I call it index. But I usually call it one of those two things, but you can call it whatever you want. I'm going to say for num. Now we use some more keywords here, in range, and now we have to put parentheses. So we're going to specify the range, and we could do, there's three numbers we have here. We have a start number, we have an end number. So this end number is actually not going to be included. So if we want to count to 10, I'm going to put 11 here. And then we have a number to count by. Now by default, it's 1. If you don't type anything, it'll always be 1. I'm going to leave it at 1 just to demonstrate that. And now, of course, we put that colon at the end. So I know this is a lot for you guys to take in. That's why I started with the while loop, because the syntax on that is just a bit easier. But a for loop, don't get overwhelmed by it, guys. It's not that confusing. It's just a couple words we have to take in here. So the for, and then this is going to be a variable. So you call this whatever you want. And then in range I have, in you're always going to use. But if you're doing it through a range of numbers that you're defining here, then you need to use this range function. And then you have in the parentheses, you put your start number, your end number, and what you want to count by. And once again, the end number is not inclusive, so it's not actually going to include 11. Once we reach 11, that's when it stops and it's done. So, okay, we press enter, and now we're tabbed. Everything tabbed is going to be inside this for loop, and while we're tabbed, and while we're inside of this for loop, we can use the variable num. So what num refers to is actually the current loop. So when we have in a range, num is going to take on 1. And then once we're done with that loop, now we go through the whole loop again, and since we count by 1, it goes to 2, and now num is going to be equal to 2, and then num is going to be equal to 3, and so on, until we get to 11, and then the loop is going to end. So if I just go print num, and let's just run that. Let's see, we get 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way to 10, because we go through the entire loop. Now this for loop, what's nice about it is it's not like a while loop where you could accidentally create an infinite loop. It's going to cycle through this. There's going to be an end eventually in a for loop. So there we go. We have counting all the way up to 10. We could do a bunch of other stuff. Like let's say we want to count by 2s now. Now let's try running it, and it's going to go 1, 3, 5, 7, 9. Again, it ends at 11. So it doesn't print that 11. 11 is when it stops. But we can count by 2s. We can count by 3s. You could even count by a negative number. Let's say I want to start at 10, and I want to end at 0, and I'm going to count by -1. We could actually go from 10 all the way down to 1. So there's a lot you could do with this range function within a for loop. You don't always have to use a range in a for loop, though. If you guys remember, a couple lessons ago, we talked about lists, and we also talked about accessing particular characters within a string. Now, I told you guys that type of functionality, like the indexing, is going to be important in a later lesson. This is where that is going to be very important. So we're going to have, let's make our, I'm going to call it my list, and let's do, let's make some numbers. Let's do equals 12, let's do 20, and let's do 70. Let's just do 70. I'm thinking of numbers that could be divided by 2, just so we could showcase that you could do math in these two. So I'm going to keep it as number, but instead of in range, I'm going to get rid of that, and I'm going to do for num in my list. Now, other languages, you can't do this so simply. You always have to index with it, but Python, you actually don't. You can just cycle through the number. It recognizes that this is a list, and when you put a list into a for loop, num is going to take on the property of the first element in the list, then the second, then the third, until it cycles through all of them. So I'm going to print num divided by 2. And let's run that. And there we go. We get 6, 10, and 35. If we want to get rid of those decimals, we could do floor division, so it'll give us an integer back. And there we go. We get 6, 10, and 35. Just like that. Very nice. You could do a whole lot when you have this, guys. This is a very, very big thing here. Now, what we could also do is we could also index this. So if I want to do, instead of for num in my list, let's say I want to access something by an index. So let's say I want to print out all the letters in my name, one letter on each line. So I'm going to do, I'm going to make a variable called name, and I'm going to set my name equal to Cameron. So I'll do for index in range. Now, instead of typing in a range, you could also just give one value, and it's going to just start at 1 and then go to that number. So I'll just do length name. So this is a function within a function. We're getting the length and the name, and this is going to put how many letters are in Cameron right here. And now, since that's included in the range, it's going to actually go from 0, 1, 2, 3 until we get to the end. So it's going to actually cycle through every letter by an index instead of just using the letter itself. So now we're going to print name. We use that square bracket for the index, right, guys? Now we go name, and we put index in here. So this index is referring to this value. Length name is going to return back a number. How many? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So there's 7 in range 7. So when you don't put a number to start at, it automatically will start at 0. So it's going to go 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. When it gets to 7, it ends. So it really cycles through 7. We're just starting at 0. So first it's going to print name index 0. Then it's going to print name 1, name 2, name 3, and so on. And if you guys want to see that, there you go. Cameron printed out one letter on each line, just like that. Now, we also could have done this the same thing before, where instead of accessing the index of it, we could have it would have just known to do one letter at a time. But we're not trying to do that, guys. I was trying to do this just so you guys could get a feel for the index, because you guys are going to need to use the indexes sometimes too. So there you guys go. If you have lists, it'll just cycle through it by default. Python will understand the type of a list. If you also need to use index, you could do that. You can name this variable whatever you want it to be. You could do I for short, just like that. You could do X, you could call it Y, you could call it whatever, but whatever you call it, it needs to be clear. It should have a purpose, whatever it is. You shouldn't just put something there randomly. Just know that you're never going to be able to change the value of I outside of here. So if I try to do I equals something out there, or let's say I have something like I equals 10 up here, and now we try running this, it's not going to have any impact. So the I in here is just going to be within the scope of this. If you have a variable with the same name outside of it, it's just going to be completely ignored. So there you guys go. I hope this helped you out a lot. If you have any questions, let me know down in the comments. I'll try and answer them for you guys, and I will see you in the next lesson.